Good evening, everybody. The Obama White House is now calling the arrival of tens of thousands of unaccompanied children at our southern border a humanitarian crisis, even though there's no way the children could have traveled 1,800 miles from Mexico's southern border to the U.S. border without great coordination among the governments and the parents of these children. Republicans say it's a direct result of President Obama's policies on immigration. The administration has effectively turned over our southern border to the governments of our neighbors to the south, and President Obama has effectively turned the Border Patrol into a welcome wagon for illegal immigration. The images on your screen show some of the nearly 50,000 children who've crossed our border illegally already this year, with no fear of deportation because of the president's executive actions and his implicit promise of amnesty. The Border Patrol estimates that nearly 250,000 children under the age of 12 will cross our border illegally and without their parents over the next 2 years. President Obama is correct to call the situation dire. The president ordered 3 separate U.S. military bases to house and to feed these children, with Customs and Border Patrol completely overrun along the border. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees concluded the majority of these children are coming from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, fleeing, they say, gangs, cartels, violence in their own homes. Thousands making that 1,800-mile journey to the U.S. border through Mexico, a trip of 1,800 miles by freight train, making it all the more inconceivable that all of this has been achieved without the full cooperation of the Mexican government. But as we reported here last week, the UN High Commissioner, Antonio Guterres, has already dismissed the responsibility of these governments for the growing crisis they've created. Guterres had this to say to Lou Dobbs tonight, quote, "The persecution experienced by the children is not usually state-sponsored, so condemning these countries is not needed," end quote. All of this happening simultaneously with primary election day. Today's elections featuring a heated primary for House Majority Leader Eric Cantor. Cantor rejects his opponent's claims that he's pro-amnesty while bragging to local television stations he's pushing President Obama for a deal on immigration reform.
I have told the president that there are some things that we can work on together. We could work on the border security bill together. We could work on things like the kids.
Cantor may not be happy garnering 52% of the vote after he pulled in nearly 80% in the previous election. As Republicans like Cantor continue to weigh the consequences of working with his White House, we could be in the midst of the first administration in our history that consistently makes policy decisions in opposition to the national interest domestically and abroad. Simply put, this is an administration that seems to have few limits on the cynical choices they're making in order to achieve their border and immigration goals. The administration today announced that Fort Sill, Oklahoma, has been designated as the 3rd Army base to be used for housing the flood of illegal immigrant children now crossing our border. Congressman James Lankford of Oklahoma will share his thoughts on all of this here in moments. Well, I told you that we had a breaking news down in Virginia. The polls there have closed, and with 140 of the 243 precincts reporting, House Majority Leader Eric Cantor is trailing challenger David Brat, the Tea Party candidate. He's ahead. Brat is ahead of Cantor by a margin of 58 to 42%. Cantor has been widely expected to win this Republican primary, and Fox News is making no call that would change that outlook. But at the same time, this contest is very much out of reach for Cantor or Brat, and we will be keeping you up to date. Congressman, I want to turn now to Congressman James Lankford, who is the chairman of the Republican Policy Committee, a member of the House Budget and Oversight Committees. Congressman, let me start with this. I mean, you've got to be surprised that your colleague, Eric Cantor, your majority leader, looks like he's in some trouble in Virginia tonight.
Yeah, we'll watch the polls on it. This is one of those areas, one of those races that no one's really watching because there's a lot of assumptions that are happening. But I'm sure Eric's paid attention to that. We'll watch and see all the precincts that are still coming in. But you're right, that's breaking news to me as well.
Let me turn to what's happening in your state. 1,200 illegal immigrant children are being moved to Fort Sill, the third military base now being used to house and care for these young children who have been brought to our border, dumped at our border. As many as 60,000. We're expecting 250,000 over the next 2 years. This is, the president calls it a crisis. Most Republicans that I've heard from say it's a crisis of the president's making. Your thoughts?
Oh, it absolutely is a crisis the president's making. He continues to work on deferred action for those that are here. He continues to talk about amnesty, continues to talk about DREAM Act. We continue to talk about securing the border first. And the reason for that is very simple. If you don't secure the border first, this is what actually occurs. And so our continual focus is we have to have border security before we talk about anything else for anybody else of any kind. Because I can tell you the vast majority of our caucus, including myself, are not amnesty folks. I don't promote an amnesty. I don't think that's how you build a nation. I don't think you begin a relationship with the greatest country on earth by doing an illegal act. But now we have this flood of children coming in, and they are children coming across the border that are being sent, that are being collected, put in these bases, and they're holding them and processing them until they can get them to a family member already here in the United States. That is a problem for us as a country.
It is a problem. It is also categorically clear that the nations from which most of these children originate are 1,800 miles away from the border upon which they are being dumped. It seems to me to be an absolutely irresistible conclusion that this administration, the Obama administration, the governments of El Salvador, the governments of Guatemala, Costa Rica, Honduras, the Mexican government are working in concert to put these children on an 1,800-mile journey through the middle of Mexico to our southern border. It's despicable what they're doing here.
And it's a human rights disaster for children on this. I don't know anyone that would say, you know, what's the best thing for children is to move them away from their parents, move them across deserts, hire them out to coyotes, to be able to move them, to be able to be in some sort of care for some short period of time, or whatever length of time this may be, on some American military base, and so we transition to another relative in some type. This is an absolute terrible way to do this. We've incentivized it in the process. These are very dangerous, very violent locations, but it's not any better than what we're currently experiencing these children doing. This is the problem. When the president incentivizes this, he's opening the door. When you refuse to enforce the borders, this is what happens on it. So it's very important not only for the protection of children that are south of the border, but also for the American government as well and for our nation, that we actually secure a border. We can do it. This is not rocket science. We can do this.
Yeah, and I don't think the American people need to be, frankly, deceived by this administration, as this administration seems intent upon doing. Speak straightforwardly to the American people. Let's have an assessment, a discussion, a dialogue, and come to a consensus. But administration after administration, this is not the first, as you know. President George W. Bush insisted on driving forward comprehensive immigration reform, as he put it, amnesty, open borders, without bringing the American people together. This turns out to be utter madness, doesn't it?
It is utter madness, and this is why we talk about over and over again, by breaking it up into smaller pieces. There are problems that are out there. We do need better hardware. We do need better software. We need better technology all along the border to be able to help secure the border. That is something we need to pass and we need to do. We need to deal with high-skilled work visas. What are we going to do with someone who comes to the United States as a student, gets a degree in engineering or in mathematics or science, medical research, wants to stay here? Should we be able to allow those folks to be able to stay here and be able to invest in an American company? That's something we have to be able to resolve in law. All the enforcement for 20 some odd years, the United States has had a law that we have to do a border security and an interior security system. That if someone comes to the country legally, student visa, work visa, travel visa, we know when they come out, we know when they leave. That's never been applied by multiple administrations. That has to be fixed. And
we're going to see what all is fixed. Congressman James Lankford, we're going to be watching, as I know you will be, the political fortunes of the House Majority Leader, Eric Cantor, fate very much up in the air right now, with 140 of 243 districts reporting he is running just about 18 points behind the Tea Party candidate. Congressman, thank you very much for being with us.
You bet, Lou. Thank you.